This is a story of workplace dynamics gone horribly wrong. It started with a touch of arrogance, literally. We hired a new billing manager. Let's call him Martin. He was probably in his 20s. Martin was fresh out of the military. He was every bit the by the book type. Picture a guy who could iron a crease in a t-shirt with his gimlet stare alone. Now the billing clerk, let's call her Nancy, had been with the hospital since it first opened its doors. She was a billing department fixture. Now Nancy was in her 60s and she loved to crow that she'd outlasted more managers than the hospital had budget cut, so that's a lot. She had a unique brand of stubbornness. She did whatever the heck she wanted to do. She made it clear she'd be at her desk doing whatever the heck she wanted to do until the day she died, if she had anything to say about it. Now, Nancy was a general of sorts, at least in her own mind. She ruled the billing department and her home with an iron fist. At work, she bossed the younger clerks around, ordering them to work on patient bills while she goofed off. At home, Nancy was a dictator. Her son had been horribly disfigured from a terrible workplace accident, and he lived under her thumb. Now, Nancy was desperate to have grandchildren. Now, this was the days before the internet. Back then, we called them mail-order brides. And so she arranged a marriage between her son and a woman who was desperate for American citizenship. Now, once the couple had a child, Nancy even named that child. And so Nancy sent the woman packing. She kept the child and her son. Absolute power had corrupted her absolutely. So Nancy was a force to be reckoned with. Now Martin, the new billing manager, was used to instant obedience from his soldiers, and so he was convinced he could tame the shrew that was Nancy. So you had these two strong personalities, and they met in a clash of the titans. Martin wrote Nancy up, but she claimed innocence, as she had with all the previous managers. And so Martin soon decided that Nancy should be terminated, the civilian version of court-martial for mutiny. And so he ordered her to catch up on delinquent accounts. Instead, Nancy spent her work time on her second gig, and that second job was cold calling people to sell them expensive Olin Mills portrait packages. Now, that's been a long time ago, so you may not have ever heard of that. But I can only hope that Nancy did not get her two gigs mixed up. I doubt that people struggling to pay medical debt were going to be eager to buy these costly portrait packages. And so then Martin made his fatal mistake. During a shouting match, a counseling session with Nancy, he put his hand on her shoulder. Nancy reported him for sexual harassment. Martin insisted that he was just trying to be kind. He was trying to show compassion toward Nancy while he was sharing some hard truths about her performance. Nancy claimed that he was a creeper and he was inching toward second base. Now I think, just my opinion, he was sick of dealing with her that day. He wanted her out of his sight and he nudged her out of the office. Regardless, he should not have put his hands on her. So as HR director, I stepped in. Now, it was pretty simple, I thought. I just told Martin, don't touch her. Keep your hands off of Nancy. But it wasn't long before Nancy was back in my office. Martin, oblivious to that warning, had grabbed Nancy's shoulder while he was talking to her at her desk. She was mad enough to bite a 10-penny nail in two. And so let's pause here for just a second. Now imagine Nancy, woman in her 60s. She looked like Margaret Thatcher in a house dress and orthopedic shoes. So you couldn't think of her as a femme fatale for sure. And now picture Martin, not exactly leading man material, and so he wasn't any kind of a Chris Hemsworth, but he wasn't a Danny DeVito either. He was married and his wife was pretty. She was young. She visited him in the office occasionally. And so, let's be clear, I don't think it was about physical attraction. Martin had been warned to keep his hands off Nancy, yet there he was, touching her, even in front of a witness. And so that's when I had an epiphany. Workplace harassment isn't always about sex. Sometimes it's about the power. Now, Martin thought he held all of the power in this particular situation. So he saw Nancy as an older woman, stuck in a dead-end job, working a second gig, trying her darndest to make ends meet. She had a reputation as an employee who couldn't meet even the lowest threshold for good performance. Martin saw Nancy as a person with no credibility, no power, no workplace capital. Now, Martin was convinced that his college degree and his extensive experience in the tight labor market made him untouchable. Now, Martin's fatal error was in thinking that Nancy was some helpless victim. He thought that whatever he dished out, she'd be grateful to take it to still have a job. But Martin was arrogant. He was so arrogant that he thought he could touch Nancy in front of a witness and get away with it. But in the end, the HR vampire, staked Martin's employment because he broke the rules. But not only that, he was foolish enough to think he could twist those rules however he wanted. When I fired him, Martin was left speechless. He is staring down the reality that in this game, he wasn't the one in control. And so, have you seen similar things happen at work? Did the perpetrator of the harassment get away with it? Let me know in the comments.